Good evening. Welcome you all to the 42nd lecture in Democracy Dialogue series organized by New Socialist Initiative. This is Subhash Gatade. Our guest this evening is Professor Atul Kohli, David K. Bruce Professor of International Affairs at Princeton University. We feel honored that despite his busy schedule, Professor Kohli agreed to deliver this lecture on the theme India under Modi, Shrinking Democracy, Growing Inequalities, unquote. As you all know, Professor Kohli is a world-renowned political scientist, and his principal research interests are in the area of political economy of developing countries. What is important to underline that through much of his scholarship, he has emphasized the role of sovereign and effective states in the promotion of inclusive development. He has authored many books around his core concerns during the last 4 decades of his career. The latest is Democracy in an Inequality in India, Political Economy of a Troubled Giant with the co-author is Professor Kanta Murli. Here's a list of few of his other books: Greed and Guns, Imperial Origins of the Developing World, 2022. Imperialism and Developing World, How Britain and then USA Shaped the Global Periphery, 2020. Poverty and Plenty in New India, 2012. And Democracy and Discontent, India's Growing Crisis of Governability. So here we are. Let's welcome Professor Kohli for this lecture.
Thank you, Subhashji. I'm happy to be invited and share my thoughts with you. I will talk for about an hour. In this talk, I'm drawing on a recent co-authored essay that was published in India Forum, a fine publication in India. And that essay was in turn drawn from the essay Subhashji just mentioned, which was published with my co-author Kanta Murali at University of Toronto just last month. So the talk will take stock of the Modi era. It's a synthetic overview. Most of the facts that I will present are known to all of you. It's how to put them together. I hope we can have a discussion about whether you agree, disagree, or comment on it otherwise at the end of my talk. I will focus, the talk is basically divided into 2 parts. The first half, I will take a look back and try to explain the rise of Modi. And in the second half of the talk, I will assess Modi in power. So let's get started. Let me give you a brief overview of the talk. I will suggest that the Modi era is characterized by 2 major developments. One, our democracy has been shrinking. And second, economic inequalities in the country have been growing. I will also suggest that these 2 developments are not only parallel, they actually help explain each other. Growing economic inequalities under the Congress government gave us Modi. That'll be the first important point I will develop when I get into the substance of the talk. And then when Modi ji came to power, his genius, political genius, was in shifting the conversation away from distributive issues to identity politics. And while many in India have been focused on which gods we should honor, economic performance under Modi ji has been pretty average. Unfortunately, the benefits of economic growth over the last decade have continued to go largely to upper classes, and I will show you data to document that. And when identity politics has not sufficed to divert attention authoritarian politics has been used to silence dissent. So that's basically the message of the talk. And as I said, I will discuss it in two parts, first focusing on rise of Modi and then assessing his performance. Understanding the rise of Modi ji, it's really a product of three sets of circumstances, and I've written in detail about each of them, and I can only discuss them in brief here. First, some important Congress's failures that gave us Modi, then BJP's own advantages, but also limits, and finally, Modi's leadership qualities, that these three factors help us understand the rise of Modi. Let me talk about each of these in turn, but fairly briefly. Now, Congress's failures are both economic and political. Let me first talk about economic failures and then political. Now, most of you know that economic growth in India between 1991 and 2013, that is the heyday of Congress's liberalization period, prior to Mr. Modi coming. Of course, that 91 to 2013 is not entirely Congress. There was a Mr. Vajpayee interregnum and this and that, but overall the economic policies during that period were steered by Manmohan Singh and Mr. Narasimha Rao, and that was a pretty impressive growth period. If you look at India's GDP growth in the blue bars, the 91 to this bar here, the 91 to 2013 period is the best economic growth India has had since independence. Not only that, if you look at the right and if you believe the data, pre-2011 data on poverty, after that the data has become quite not reliable, but till that point the data was reasonably reliable, and it shows that poverty was coming down. So the puzzle is this. Under Congress, economic growth was robust, poverty was coming down, and yet Congress failed to capitalize politically on this. They gave away the store to Modi. What happened? My suggestion is that this is both economic and political failures, but the key economic failure was this: growing economic inequalities in India. This data is borrowed from others, and if you want to know where the data came from, you can check my articles and books. It's all properly documented. This is pretty reliable data from Piketty's workshop by Bharti et al. Piece, which is cited in the book. What I want you to notice is how sharply economic inequality in India started growing under the Congress government. On this left slide, notice right here, after economic liberalization around 1991, economic inequality skyrocketed. So much so that at the peak of this income inequality, India was as unequal as at the turn of 20th century under colonial rule. We have not seen this much economic inequality. It was bound to have some political consequences. And my suggestion is that economic inequality in the end hurt Congress Party through three pathways. Let me walk you through those three pathways now. First, lower classes started to abandon the Congress Party. This was partly a function of Congress Party giving up on Garibi Hatao, abandoning sort of its socialist posture, which may not have been deep, but was still real, had political meaning. But it was also a function of relative deprivation. So look at this data here. This is support of poor and lower classes for Congress Party. From 2009 onwards, there has been a steady decline in the vote of shares, sort of how much the poor and lower classes vote for the Congress Party. Now, of course, it's the case that Congress lost support across all classes, but this was especially consequential for Congress's decline, not only because Congress was supposed to be the party of the poor, but also these two groups constitute nearly half the electorate. So decline of support in this group took a bite out of Congress's political position. So that's the one pathway, losing support among the poor. But I think the most important pathway through which growing economic inequalities hurt Congress was that the inequality was creating mega rich in India. And it's a bit of a political surprise. Maybe you folks will have views on this. Congress created the mega rich, but failed to get political support from them. Instead, the mega rich started throwing support behind Mr. Modi. While the technocrats in Delhi were pushing economic liberalization, somehow the political skills of Congress Party were found wanting. They were not able to control the social forces that economic liberalization was releasing. Neither were they able to sort of hold on to their support of the poor, and most surprisingly, they failed to sort of get support of big capital in India. Big capital slowly but surely was meeting in places like the Gujarat Economic Summits, and a wholly different alliance was being forged with BJP, Mr. Modi, and India's sort of large corporate sector. So that's the second pathway through which Congress lost the support. And the third was, of course, the pattern of economic growth, as all of you know, had failed to create jobs, and a lot of young people were becoming politically available to be mobilized. And so what we noticed is, this is a third slide, notice that among the youth under 35, especially among, in the upper income, which is on the right side, it's not surprising that they're supporting the BJP. But lower classes and middle classes, that the young under 35 are supporting the BJP, became a major issue. These were the aspirational classes, the disgruntled classes. These are the people who were joining Rath Yatras, and these are the people who were destroying the mosques and becoming vigilantes. So the overall pattern of economic growth, I think, was a major liability for Congress, because Congress, which became powerful in the country because of its political skills, and now, ironically, had some good economic technocratic leaders, but politically it was wanting. It did not know how to absorb the new political forces it had unleashed. And this was related to Congress's growing political failures, and that's the second half of this puzzle. Congress lost its ideological moorings. Once it gave up on socialism, it focused on economic liberalization and private sector-led growth. Nobody knew what Congress stood for. Occasionally, they would bend to the left. Occasionally, they would bend to the right. And instead of looking like wise political balancing, it looked opportunistic. Corruption did not help. And overall, the old Grand Party went into a decline. Not only ideological, there was an organizational failure. Most of you will recognize the old organizational failure, which I had written about in my earlier books after Indira Gandhi. That's not what I'm talking about. Indira Gandhi, of course, destroyed the old Congress Party, but that's an old story. What was new was a bizarre bifurcated leadership structure in which Sonia Gandhi is where power of Congress Party really lay in the family, and the leaders like Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao, who were running the country. So these people could have claimed enormous success in creating high growth and bringing down poverty, but the power structure was such in India's Congress party that those who might have become major leaders were constrained because Sonia Gandhi wanted these leaders essentially to be a placeholder while her son was being groomed for leadership. That's why these older gentlemen who were good leaders, technocratic, but they didn't have an independent political base, they might have grown into it. But this leadership organizational structure profoundly hurt Congress party because Congress failed to come up with a candidate who looked presidential, quote unquote. India's system had quietly become presidential. People were already voting for Indira Gandhi versus others. When Mr. Modi came to the forefront, it was a contest between Modi and Rahul Gandhi, and eventually Rahul Gandhi at that early stage was no match. So what I'm getting at here is that economic failure, along with political failures, cost Congress dearly and help us understand why, in spite of a good economic innings, they failed to capitalize on it politically. They left essentially behind leadership, a vacuum in leadership, ideology, and organization. And a complex polity like India cannot live with that vacuum. Something was bound to change. And what that change was, of course, Mr. Modi. So the second step in the rise of Mr. Modi, right? The first, I said 3 steps: Congress's failures, which I just explained. The second step is BJP's political assets and limits. Most of you know this. I just want to emphasize a couple of points. That BJP has coherent ideology and a strong organization is well known. But do think of this in the context of Congress's ideology becoming relatively incoherent and organizational structure becoming sort of quite essentially left a vacuum. So with that vacuum, the BJP was well positioned to fill that vacuum with its good ideology and organization. But it is the case that till about 1990, the BJP, as you all know, was pretty well on the margins. I want to emphasize a couple of things at this point, and I'm going to show you some electoral data here. So look at this left side. This is basically India's voting patterns, share of vote by the 2 parties. Most of you know that, but I want to emphasize a couple of things here. So BJP, as most of you know, I'm looking for so this is the point where after Rath Yatra, the first moment of BJP's climb in popularity is right here, after the Rath Yatra. That everybody knows. But what I want you to notice, and maybe you know this already, but I find it rather interesting, is that from about 1991 till 2014, right, that's 25 years, BJP's voting share in India does not move up significantly. It's pretty well constant at about 20 and 22%, right? It jumps on to 2014 only here. But up to that point, it's right around this line. What's the message? The message is that BJP clearly had some political assets. It used them very well in Rath Yatra and climbed and sort of moved up its support pretty substantially, but then its toolkit was empty. For 25 years, it could not increase its support base. That suggests 2 things. First, that only 1 out of 4 or 5 voting Indians are converts to core Hindutva. And second, the BJP definitely needed something else besides its Hindutva to become India's dominant party. They were stuck at 22% for 25 years. And that something else was Mr. Modi. So the third part of the explanation for the rise of Modi is, of course, Mr. Modi himself. Most of you know about Mr. Modi. I hardly need to say much more about him, but a couple of things I do want to emphasize. While he had a reputation of being a good leader in Gujarat, his credentials as a Hindu nationalist, fundamentalist, whatever you want to call it, were quite strong. He was associated with Godhra, even though he was not found guilty by the Supreme Court. That association stayed, and it certainly helped his credentials within the BJP as a credible Hindu nationalist. He also had a reputation of getting things done. But most important, I think, all of those qualities can make you a major leader or not. What was really needed, or what really pushed him forward, was support of big business. It was big capital that started almost for the first time in Indian political history, sort of saying who will be a good prime minister. This was a major break in Indian politics, where big capital openly decided that they are going to play a political role in anointing India's leaders. With that support, for the first time, BJP jumps up about 11 percentage points in 2014. And scholars who have studied that with some care, my colleague Chibber at Berkeley and Mr. Verma, Dr. Verma at the Center for Policy Research in Delhi, they have in their work, they have documented pretty persuasively that this 10, 11 percentage point extra between 2009 and 2014 can be attributed to Modi himself. And so it's not the party, it's not Hindutva, it is very much quote unquote, the Modi factor. Now, what is this Modi factor? I think two things are important to understand. First, India's political system had quietly become presidential. People were really voting for Modi versus Rahul. This is clear even in public opinion data. So when asked who would make a better prime minister prior to the 2014 election, the data said Modi 34%, Rahul Gandhi 21%. Eventually, when the votes came out of BJP's share under Modi and Congress's share under Rahul, it was almost identical. It was 34% up or down and 21% up or down. So the choice of leader essentially decided the choice of parties. And in that sense, India's political system had become quite presidential. And Modi understood it. And I don't think Congress Party fully understood it. And they paid a heavy price for that. But in addition, I want to repeat, yes, all of this was true. Modi was a charismatic speaker. He could certainly persuasively argue that he was a common person who had risen to the top, whereas Rahul was a, sort of privileged family, scion of a ruling family, etc. All of those mattered. But none of that would have gone that far, in my own assessment, without the enormous financial support BJP party had. I will give you some figures on electoral finance towards the end of the talk, but BJP's advantage has been pretty profound over all the nearest competitors when it comes to access to money. In any case, that gave us Mr. Modi, and now I'm going to spend the next 15, 20 minutes talking about Modi and power, and then we can have an open discussion. So this is the second half of the talk. As I promised, first half was rise of Modi. and this is Modi in power. You're all living with this, so none of the facts will certainly surprise you. However, my interpretation I will present nevertheless. So my sense is, or my interpretation is, the two things that need discussing are growing authoritarianism and economic performance to get a sense of a good assessment of Mr. Modi in power. And I just want to emphasize, I'm a scholar. I'm not a politician. I'm not taking sides here. I'm pretty vicious on Congress as well as on Mr. Modi. So as far as I'm concerned, it's open season. It's a story I'm telling is one without heroes. And it's a sad story because it affects a lot of poor people. And in that sense, it's not personal. On the other hand, it has to be told, the story. So growing authoritarianism first and economic performance second. India is, of course, still a democracy. 2024 elections underline that. Nobody can deny that. However, it is a flawed democracy. On the question of how much India is not a democracy is being debated. Many in India would say foreigners outside overestimate the decline of democracy in India. Others disagree, and that debate will go on. My own sense is that this democracy index created by the Economist magazine, it's not a magazine I usually endorse, but I think it is their assessment of global patterns of democracy, I find pretty persuasive. And in that, India turns out to be a flawed democracy, about as flawed as the United States. And I think maybe next year that rating will change further. But for now, their characterization of India, along with the US, as a flawed democracy is pretty persuasive. And that's where we are. So what are the flaws of India's democracy? Of course, most of them can be described as creeping authoritarianism, but let me break that down, and none of them will be surprise to you, but maybe we can think about how to explain them. Targeting Muslims has been a core strategy of the BJP. In some ways, it's quote unquote rational because it helps them consolidate their Hindu support. Examples you all know about. Just to repeat what happened in Kashmir, the Citizenship Act, Ayodhya, Ram Mandir, and systematic vigilantism while leaders look the other way are some of the main examples of how Indian Muslims have been harassed. And coming from Lucknow as I do, I find that especially painful because I grew up in a city that was heavily Muslim and used to live and play together. And to see this unfold feels deeply sad that we have come to this pass so as to help build political support. This type of bigotry doesn't fit well with me. Second, this too is well known to you, but it needs to be repeated. Checks and balances in India have been eroded. A major example of that is election commissions. The independence has been eroded. It has become obsequious to political leaders. And Supreme Court often shows partisanship to a level which certainly, since Indira Gandhi, certainly a lot more partisan than prior to Indira Gandhi. So India's major independent political institutions have come under pressure and have succumbed, unfortunately. Other examples of growing authoritarianism are harassment of all opposition, especially political parties, but also a variety of other folks. I have had people come into my office in Princeton, BJP, telling me that if I criticize the government, they will take away my OCI card, etc., etc. It's just a personal example, but they just don't want any opposition, and that's what authoritarians do. So one accepts that. On the other hand, they have to be called out for that. They want us to be afraid. I won't be afraid. So I will criticize when I have to. There has been an enormous amount of controlling of information. We know that. The saddest one is media, major media, how they have fawned over the leader and just sort of ignored things that should have been criticized, whether it was, national security issues, this and that. Why that is, I'm still trying to understand. My good friend Ram Reddy has been writing on this, who edits the India Forum, and he has some interesting insights. But it is the case that media is such an important part of an independent functioning democracy, and its obsequiousness has been disheartening. The government itself has shied away from giving out accurate data. This is a major reversal in how India used to do business. Indian data used to be trusted. Now growth data is suspect, poverty data is not sort of released, unemployment data is sort of, put out, or not put out. And finally, of course, universities are being harassed and appointments are being targeted. And all of that is part of controlling information. And you may wonder, why do they need to do this? And I think my answer to that, especially, right, why do they need to do this if they're already popular? It's one thing Indira Gandhi did that because she was a beleaguered leader, right? She was trying to hold on to her power. Mr. Modi is popular. Why does he need to do such creeping authoritarianism? And my answer to that, or my suggestion, is that they need to control the discourse. Ideological parties cannot have alternate centers of truth. They need to have what they think is the official discourse. Communists did that, one understood that, but now we have right of center parties like Mr. Modi's BJP also doing it. None of these authoritarian actions will surprise you. You know about this. But the question, which is more than a passing, ought to be more than of passing interest, is why is India moving towards authoritarianism? The simple answer is neither Mr. Modi nor the BJP are liberals. From the very beginning, the party was not committed to liberalism, right? If you go back to 1920s in India, and where all Indian political parties are emerging, Congress was the liberal party, on the left were communists, and on the right was RSS, which was looking to European fascism. So all of India's major political forces emerged in the 1920s. The world was in ferment between the two wars, and we copied the three basic tendencies: liberalism, which became Gandhi and Nehru party, our Communist Party, and our RSS and BJP party. And so they, from the beginning, were not liberal. So one could say, well, they're not liberal, so they don't respect liberal niceties. But I think that's too easy an answer. It's part of the answer, but it's too easy an answer. I think a fuller answer is to think of power like water. What I mean is, if you don't check power, like if you don't check water, it rises and spreads. You have to contain it. So to understand why power grabbing becomes possible, you have to look at not only who the power grabbers are, but who else can contain them. And what has been happening in India is that there's very little resistance. Think of political opposition in India. When it came together in the 2024 election, partially, they had some success. But on the whole, opposition has been splintered. Institutions have proven to be weak. Resistance has been minimal. And most of all, corporate support has been behind Mr. Modi. Why big business does not object to stifling of democracy? I don't know the answer to that. They should. In the end, they will be better off with a stable democracy, because supporting demagogues, well, one demagogue may be pro-business, another demagogue may be anti-business. So you're playing with fire. If you're a big corporate leader, when you support demagogues for short-term political stability and short-term political profits, that type of cronyism can backfire. So my advice to them would be that they would be better off with sort of more moderate democracy rather than a more extreme pro-business demagogue. But who's listening? We're academics. If we were listened to, world would. So anyways, that's neither here nor there. The main point is corporate support has been an enabling force rather than a resisting force trying to help India's democracy strengthen. So one major trend has been growing authoritarianism. I've given you examples and tried to speculate why that may be so. Now let's turn to a second part of Modi's performance, and that's economic performance. Now it is the case then that in East Asian countries, growing authoritarianism has been associated with pretty good economic performance. So Korea, Taiwan, and to an extent even China, you can see enormous growth and removal of poverty and moderate inequalities. And in those circumstances, one may be tempted to say, well, maybe there are redeeming qualities to authoritarianism. And so the question might arise, is there anything redeeming about authoritarianism in India? Do our trains run better now? Has our economy grown better? Has our inequality done better? Have our poor done better? And I'm afraid the answer is no. Performance has been pretty average, and I'm going to walk you through some of that data in conclusion to my talk. India's economic growth under Mr. Modi it's not been bad. I already showed you. I'll show it again just to refresh your memory. So from 2014 to 2024, Indian economy grew at about 6% per annum by global standards. That's pretty impressive. That's not a bad economic growth, but it's not as good as under Congress. And not only that, it's not as good as what was promised. The promises were that Mr. Modi was going to sort of to scale up the Gujarat model, help India industrialize, slogan was Make in India, etc., etc. That has not come to pass, and I want to focus on that issue for a minute. A lot could be said on this, but in a short talk, I want to focus on failure of industrial growth in India under Mr. Modi. So this is where I thought the economy was going to go under Mr. Modi. That's what Make in India sounded like. It sounded like almost East Asian government was going to subsidize sort of type of industrial policy, support manufacturing, promote manufactured exports, and India would try to compete with China. Unfortunately, that's not what has come to pass. Industrial growth has not done very well. Let me show you this is simply the three sectors: agriculture, industry, and services. Just focus on the industry for 1 minute, and you will see industrial growth has not been that impressive throughout Mr. Modi. As I said, it's under 6% growth rate, and India growth continues to be led by service sector. Most of you know that. So what happened? The interesting question is, how come there hasn't been a resurgence of industry in India? A lot of complicated issues. I've written about them, and others are writing. My friend Nagaraj in Bombay has been writing about it, and people should read his work. The short answer is that Mr. Modi really did not have a coherent strategy for how to pursue rapid manufacturing growth in India. Instead, there was an effort to bring in one type of advisor as an economic in the planning commission, the old planning commission, another type of advisor, and it was all in the other parts of the government. Even core economic thinking within the government was pulling in different directions. Some supported liberalization, some supported industrial growth, and there wasn't a coherent strategy. It was it could be made to look like as if India wanted to emulate East Asia. But if you look closely at what the government was doing, what comes out, and this is just a summary statement, I can't go into all the details in a brief talk. I'll be happy to answer questions about that. If you look at what is the core essence of the strategy India is pursuing, it is more crony capitalism than it is sustained industrial policy. They support business, but they support business, build airports, or do whatever seems to come easy. So India has been taking an easy way out in terms of government supporting whatever allows for quick profitability. And this alliance, which sort of looks East Asian alliance of state shaping business community to promote exports, is really not quite that. In India, class trumps the nation. In East Asian countries, governments prioritize national economic development, and nationalism was economic. In India, class is being prioritized, and nationalism is more religious. And I could break that down into a lot more detail, but I think that's what's going on. They wanted to sound like East Asia, but the substance was missing. And as a result, we continue to be more a service-led growth. And now people are going to simply want to make virtue out of what is there and saying, well, industrial growth, manufacturing growth is not in the cards. Let's just focus on service growth because that's the best we can do. But in any case, trying to assess Mr. Modi's economic performance, it is important to notice that economic growth has not been very impressive. And at the heart of that is a failure of industrial policy and manufacturing. That's the first point. Second point is what has happened to inequalities during this time period. Now, as I already mentioned, Congress gave us enormous inequalities, which in turn gave us Modi, especially by failing to get the support of big capital who threw their weight behind Mr. Modi. What has happened to inequalities since then under Mr. Modi? Here's some data I want you to focus on. A couple of things are quite interesting. At least I found them very interesting. I hope you will too. Notice this. Well, first notice that the share of top 10% has not altered dramatically during the Modi period. Okay? But then notice what has happened to the share of top 1%. It has jumped by 9%. And notice that nearly all of this, I'm sorry, I want to take that back. Also notice that if you go to, lost my arrow, okay, sorry. All right, somehow I've lost my pointer, but do look at the top 0.1%. And there too, you notice a sharp increase. So the two major trends under Mr. Modi has been that the super rich are getting super rich. And the genius, as I said, of Mr. Modi is while this is happening, we're all debating which gods we should be praying to. So this is the biggest drama that has been going on quietly in our country. So inequalities have continued to grow, but their pattern has shifted. The final point then should be asked is, has Mr. Modi done much for the poor? What has happened to welfare provision? A fair amount of hype has been made. I have even heard good colleagues say, Mr. Modi has created a welfare state. Nonsense. It's just nonsense. The data certainly does not support it. There is hype, but when you peel away the hype, and I'm just going to show you some last bit of slides, and then I will finish because my hour will be mostly over. But do ponder these next 4 slides, which are about welfare expenditures in India. Look at this slide while I take a sip of water. So this is all CPR data. It's very reliable as far as I know. Poor CPR, which is almost no more, used to do outstanding work. But what this data shows is, of course, there was a rise in social sector expenditure during COVID. But after that, it declined, and it's, I don't want to exaggerate how bad it is, but it's certainly no better than it used to be way back. So essentially, overall social sector expenditure is flat in India. So anybody who says that the Modi regime has created a welfare state in India has to at least answer, minimally question, who's funding this? Because the money is not there. In terms of overall expenditures, the data is pretty clear. Maybe the data is wrong. Maybe I'm missing something, but usually one relies on data, and this data suggests that nothing like that is going on. Okay, so that's social expenditure. Is it possible that other things are happening elsewhere? This is expenditure on education overall. There are 2 types of data here. One is as percentage of GDP, and one as a percentage of overall government expenditure. There's a slight decline in terms of total expenditure. I don't want to make too much of that. I don't want to claim extra. The only claim I will make is this is pretty flat. This is health expenditure data. Here, things have improved a little bit, but it's 1.35%, Bangladesh spends 3%. African countries spend more. And just as I didn't want to claim extra before, I will again claim this is about flat. And finally, this is breakdown of all the social expenditures into different types of programs. The source of this data is not showing up on the slides, but it was taken from Advocacy and Government, who in turn took it from CPR's data. Only couple of things are worth commenting on here. Oh, I did find my thing here. So this brown is food subsidy mainly. This went up during the COVID years, which was a good thing, but then it has shrunk steadily. So this helps the food subsidies, of course, that helps poor people the most in terms of availability of food. And that is now back to 25% of the overall expenditure compared to 28, 26. So it's about flat, maybe a little decline. And the hopeful thing in this used to be NREGA, which was part of rural development, and now that's also gone. And so what we have is overall expenditures have not risen. If you break them down, the ones that might have benefited the poor the most, such as food subsidies and NREGA, those have also been terminated. So if one is assessing Mr. Modi's economic performance, growth is not any better. Manufacturing growth, which he supposedly wanted to promote, did not rapidly accelerate. Inequalities have risen, not in the same manner as Congress is, but the super rich becoming world-class billionaires type. Welfare expenditures are flat. And if you break down the overall welfare expenditures, those that used to benefit the poor the most have shrunk. By my moral calculus, this is not a superior economic performance. And so the East Asian question of does some authoritarianism be tolerated because it helps economic performance is moot for India. In India's case, creeping authoritarianism is a net loss. Our economy has done no better as it did under more democratic Congress people. So the two major developments, authoritarianism and average economic performance, suggest that we have lost politically without gaining economically. So let me conclude my talk. In India, creeping authoritarianism has economic origins. Unfortunately, this is not only true for India, it has become a global trend. We're part of a much broader tendency. I'm happy to talk about any of those issues if you're interested, but this talk is on India, and so I will continue to focus on India. But I do want to sensitize you to the fact that this is happening in other parts of the world too, whether it's Turkey or United States or elsewhere. During the 2024 elections, and this is essentially this is essentially supporting the earlier point that creeping authoritarianism has economic origins. So that during the 2024 elections, BJP had access to nearly half of all the electoral funds. So the rest of the parties combined spent 55%, and BJP spent 45%. BJP spent twice as much as the Congress party. And yet we know that BJP's performance in 2024 was less than spectacular. They expected a lot better, but they did not come up with what they had hoped for or predicted. And in this conclusion lies both despair and hope. Despair because we're in a position where one does not really know how to break the stranglehold of an alliance between the rich and a demagogue. When state and capital work together, average citizen can feel pretty helpless as to how do you fight two such powerful set of forces. But it's not all hopeless. the fact is that Congress Party did a lot better than it was expected, especially in my home state of UP in the 2024 election. I was surprised myself. I was there during the elections, and I noticed that people were beginning to turn away from the BJP. I asked our family servants, I think everybody here knows Hindi, so I will talk in Hindi for a minute. So I said, किसको वोट दिया तुमने चबन? इस बार नहीं दिया हमने मोदी जी को। मैंने कहा क्या हुआ, पिछली बार तो दिया था उनको तुमने। हाँ, कहते हैं पिछली बार मिसेस ने कहा था कि गैस सिलेंडर पे उनकी तस्वीर लगी हुई है, उसी को जाके वोट दो, तो देते थे। मैंने कहा इस बार क्यों नहीं दिया? इस बार नहीं दिया जी क्योंकि हमारे लड़कों को जॉब ही नहीं मिल रही है, कोई म्यूनिसिपैलिटी में जॉब ही नहीं है। तो वो सब कहते हैं कांग्रेस आएंगी तो जॉब बढ़ जाएंगी। अच्छा, मैंने कहा ऐसा भी होता है? तो आई स्टेड क्वाइट, बट such casual conversations were creating a sense that whether it was Hindutva, whether it was implicit welfareism, which had been politicized, was not quite doing the job. And instead, economic issues and economic appeals were beginning to make a comeback. And so I'm led to the conclusion, and this is the last thing I will say, is, you cannot fool majority of the people indefinitely, and in there lies some hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kohli, for this excellent, thought-provoking presentation about what India has become under Modi. And I'm sure there are many queries and comments from the participants here. Many leading scholars and activists have joined the discussion. So before we begin, I will just request my friend and comrade Ravi to share his initial comment, and then we'll start the discussion. Ravi, please.
Thank you, Subhash, and thank you, Professor Kohli, for accepting our invitation and for such a beautiful talk, such a robust analysis based on undeniable facts. I think what you have said resonates very well with all of us here at Democracy Dialogues. And my feeling is that it resonates with everyone in the audience, more or less, Before Subhash and Bhargav invite many of the guests, honor experts, and questions from audience at large, let me start the discussion session by asking a kind of general question in two parts. First part is that going back to the beginning of your talk, if Congress paid the price and eventually the country paid the price for growing inequality, in post-1991 or post-Indira period, whichever way one sees it. So why does it happen that the centrists and liberals have to pay the price, and when the authoritarians and rightists come to power, the inequality keeps on growing, and there does not seem to be much backlash against them. Okay, so why do inequality penalizes the centrist and the liberals? Of course, I'm left too, but I'm not talking of left because it's not as big a force in India as liberals and centrists. The second part is that when economic crisis deepens, when the economic system fails to deliver, then one would expect that there will be struggles and movements along the economic axis and along the class axis. But instead, there is, all over the world, as you pointed towards the end of this phenomena, is that instead, their identity politics in India, this communal politics, religious identities, so along the religious, race, ethnic, other us versus them axis, questions. There is more political movement along those axes. There is more traction along that axis as not along the class axis. So why do centrists and liberals have to pay a heavier price for inequality, growing inequality? And in economic crisis, why cultural factors play a much bigger political role, whereas one would expect that class factors should play a bigger role?
Please, yeah.
Subhashji, how would you like to conduct this?
Yeah.
I talk, I respond to each.
Yeah, immediately, please, your responses.
Those are very good questions, Raviji. I'm not sure I have any definite answer, but I can share my thoughts with you. So since we are having a discussion. See, liberals, and this is as much true for the US as it is for India. The Democrats have paid a heavy price for economic malice, and Trump doesn't. And in India, Congress paid a heavy price for growing economic inequality, and Mr. Modi doesn't. And so your question is very prescient as to what's going on here. And in a sense, it's connected to your second question. It's sort of identity versus class. Who has the capacity to mobilize those political forces more effectively? I think the right has less inhibition about mobilizing base human instincts. So bigotry is something liberals cannot easily mobilize. That's what makes them liberals. So they cannot go on saying so-and-so is awful in our society. That's why we have so many problems. That type of bigotry comes in very handy for right-wing parties, whether it's immigrants in Europe, whether it's people of color in the United States, whether it's Muslims in India, whether it was Jews for Nazis, So there is a type of othering that the right does a lot better than the liberals do. And that's partly why inequality hurts liberals. And for a while, the right can capitalize on that. But do notice that the time period over which the right benefits seems to be pretty finite. It doesn't go on forever, which is what I meant at the end. You cannot fool people indefinitely, because it is a type of mobilization of bigotry. But when that does not get you jobs, maybe you can do it for 20 years. Somewhere along the line, politics must return to questions of who gets what, when, and how, not which gods we pray to. And in that sense, I think you're right saying that liberals have a disadvantage. The left has a disadvantage on that. But over a longer term, I don't think the battle is lost. The issue of why not more class politics is a wonderful question. I've been pondering. I wrote about the Indian left in my early life, and now I'm not even sure what happened to them. Where is the strong Indian left? And its decline, not only in India, across the world, it's quite stunning. And in some ways, the rise of right has paralleled the decline of the left. And in a sense, labor unions are gone. I'm not talking about India, but certainly in other parts of the world. Soviet Union imploded. Variety of left parties became delegitimized. So in the last 20, 30 years, the left suffered and the right rose. And the right rose on the back of identity politics, and even class inequalities have not given rise to the left remains a major conundrum. I'm not sure I understand it, except that the state has come down very heavily on the left. So as the state became a tool of the richer and more technology of repression developed, it has become harder for left to mobilize. And as a result, class is not as potent a force.
We have with us Kumar Ketkar Saab, ex-member of parliament. So I will request him to unmute and share his views. Please, Kumar Saab.
Yeah, actually, I do not understand the contradiction in the statement that the big capital and the corporate class supported Modi even before he became prime minister. And after becoming prime minister, corporates continue to support him. If that is the situation, why corporates and these capitalists are not coming forward to invest in India? The investment climate is miserable. So if they are really supporting Modi, they should help at least themselves by having investment, which they are not investing at all. So the so-called crony capitalists are not even helping their crony boss called Modi. So there is a contradiction between the statement that crony capitalists have actually helped him, but they are not actually helping him in political terms. And therefore the situation is quite bad. And second, to raise a caveat on Ravi's question of centrists and liberals. Centrists and liberals over a period have proved to be complete political opportunists, more close to the state power. Like New York Times also not supporting Mamdani in New York election. In fact, they opposed him, actively opposed him. And in India, a large number of so-called centrists and liberals who talked big about Nehru and Gandhi are actually supporting Modi. And all those who opposed Indira Gandhi's authoritarianism between 1975 and 1977 or from 72 are today supporting Modi's authoritarianism. Many of them, I can name them, many of the people who said they were opposing the autocratic forces unleashed by Indira Gandhi are actually helping Modi and supporting Modi, and they were all the so-called leftist, liberal, centrist intellectuals. So it is difficult to reconcile these total contradictions on the one hand of the capitalist class, on the other hand, the so-called intelligentsia.
Those are great questions. You know, why private investment in India has remained sluggish in spite of a pro-business government is a major conundrum. I think the honorable gentleman who asked that question already knows the answer, but I will spell it out for the audience, my own view on it. I think investors make investment based on an economic logic. They're not going to simply invest to help Modi. Modi is small fry in their overall calculation. You know, and Adani will take all the airports he can get, but whether he builds one more airport or not will in the end be a question of what the economic logic of that decision is. The reason big capital is not investing in manufacturing may well reflect government policy, but they're not going to just invest to help Modi. So I see the point that we have a supposedly pro-business, crony capitalist government in India, and yet capital is not obliging and investing back. I think that reflects that government policies are not helping in any deep way push capital to invest, even if economic circumstances are not the most favorable. So it's partly a political failure. It's partly that economic investment in India is responding mainly to broader economic logic of profitability, and the two have, it has not been tamed by politics. That's what's going on. Had it been tamed by politics, we would get a slightly different response. That's what happened in East Asia. State policies tamed capital and said, you will have to accept lower rates of profit because we want you to follow a national logic of nation building. And capital fell in line. Mr. Modi doesn't have that type of political capacity. He is beholden to capital in the first place. And so in that sense, in India, private capital is doing what private capital does, which is looking for opportunities to make profit. And when it suits them, they will invest. When it doesn't suit them, they will not invest more. And Mr. Modi has not made a net difference, which underlines some of the political failure I was talking about of strategy. As to centrists and hypocrisy, that's an old story, sir. You know that. I know that. Sort of most people in most parts of the world bend to logic of power. It's one way of expressing self-interest. I don't, if they're very powerful forces, even Mao said, what do? You bend, So the people who are to be admired, who defy the logic of power, but a lot of centrists supporting right-wing causes. It's an old issue, and I don't like them anymore. I agree with you that Democratic Party in the US not supporting Mamdani was shameful. But is it understandable? Yes. Is it shameful? Yes. Both of those are right. And that's going on in India too. We may not like it, but deep down we understand it. That's how most of us survive when the odds are against.
Before I invite Comrade Bhargav to share questions from the chat box, I will just appeal to you that if you want to raise questions, you can raise your hand also, or you can write in the chat box. Please, Bhargav, please share a question in the chat box, from the chat box.
Sorry for being late, actually, it took time.
Please.
Anyway, three points essentially. First, it's of course a brilliant presentation, but I also feel, as Comrade Ravi Sinha has said, that the economic factors have been overstated in a way. Actually, Congress, to my mind, Congress hegemony over India had two phases, one under Jawaharlal Nehru and another under Indira Gandhi. Under Jawaharlal Nehru was more stable, but it ended with the death of Jawaharlal Nehru, 62 itself. When Lal Bahadur Shastri came, Congress hold was perceptibly much weaker, though there is no electoral performance under him. Indira Gandhi tried to revive it by going radical. He abolished the privy purses, nationalized private banks, and then gave the call for Garibi Hatao. Yet in 67, Congress started losing the states, except in 57 Kerala. This is the first time Congress started losing states, and at the end of it, 75, we had the emergency. So it started much earlier than we are telling here. That is one point. The second point, why does the corporate sector support Modi? There are perhaps two reasons. One, in the run-up to the election of 1914, Gurcharan Das said, a commentator, right-wing commentator, sort of a spokesperson for the corporate interest, He said that if we are to make to choose between economic neoliberalism and democracy and secularism, we'll have to choose economic neoliberalism. That is one. The second point is during emergency, probably it was Advani who said that when the captains of industry were asked to bend, they started crawling. That's the second issue. Now, third point, why Modi wants authoritarianism while he is so popular? The point is Modi is not, unlike Modi or rather the RSS, BJP are unlike any other force. They want to remake India. That's why authoritarianism is needed. A very decent example, right? Almost the other day, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme was essentially scrapped. They did two things. They not only did scrap the scheme in its essence, but they changed its name from Mahatma Gandhi to Ji Ramji. So my point, that shows that they want to remake India. Not only the content, even the symbols and icons are to be changed. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I agree with much of what you said, sir. There's no disagreement in the points. Of course, Congress decline had begun earlier. I was not focusing on that time period. I'm focusing on the post-1991 Congress, the post-liberalization Congress, because that's when economic inequality started rising pretty sharply. Prior to that, Congress's rise and decline, I don't think can be attributed very simply to similar economic forces. There was a lot of organizational malaise. There was a generational shift from nationalists to, next generation. There was leadership factionalism. I've written books on that subject. But during the post-1991 period, I think economic factors do become very significant, especially if you look at how much economic success Congress was having in terms of growth and decline of poverty, and yet profound political failure, giving away the store to Mr. Modi. I think the economic factors have to be taken into account. And why Mr. Modi remains popular? It's a combination of continuation of core Hindutva support, about 20% of the populace, another probably 10% just the leadership hype and the leadership suggestion that you're getting things done. There's also failure of alternatives. Who else? Most people in country ask that question. It's not a matter of one terrific alternative to another bad alternative. You're often comparing two bad alternatives and you choose the least bad. That's usually how democracy works. And in that sense, some support from Mr. Modi is simply they look at Congress and say, can Congress do better? And many come up saying, probably not, maybe not, maybe next time around Rahul will become more, presidential and people will tilt that way. It was certainly beginning to happen in 2024. I think it's important to keep in mind that yes, Mr. Modi is popular, but the last election also showed that he's pretty vulnerable. In my home state, right next to my home, in Ayodhya, he did not do very well. He built the Ram Mandir and he barely sort of kept his own seat. Overall share declined and lost the Ayodhya seat, which suggests, and in UP, of course, the BJP sort of lost significant amount of political support, and that's the heartland of the BJP. So I think the suggestion or your thought that why is he so popular needs to be tempered by, well, maybe he's not that popular. Some popularity is there. Of course, he won the election handsomely. And some of it is, as I said, core Hindutva, some of it is leadership hype, but there are also vulnerabilities.
Thank you very much, Professor Kohli, sir. I'm taking from chat box a few questions. I'm leaving some comments and some loud thinking, and I'm only taking questions which are formulated in the form of the question. First one is from Sunil Gatade. How you see the paradox of Modi consolidating his hold over politics after the 2024 Lok Sabha setback at a time when India is being marginalized rapidly on the international scene?
Would you repeat that question, sir?
Sir, I'll do. This is a question from one Mr. Sunil Gatade. How you see the paradox of Modi consolidating his hold over politics after the 2024 Lok Sabha setback at a time when India is being marginalized rapidly on the international scene?
Yeah, I got the question. Yes, thank you. See, I'm not sure if that's a contradiction. You know, you can consolidate power domestically and not be a major player outside. Is that a contradiction? Maybe, you know. And is India being marginalized globally? Compared to when? I think Trump's tariffs and Trump's equation of India and Pakistan certainly move in that direction. But, you know, Trump is doing that for lots of people. It's not only Mr. Modi. He is diminishing all of Europe. So one has to take with a grain of salt as to how durable those trends are. And in some ways, if you think that the domestic and the international trends are connected, I would go almost the opposite way and say that Modi's less than stellar performance in the 2024 election made his hand not as strong in dealing outside. He doesn't look as strong as he used to. It was after 2019 that he looked like riding high. Everybody in India loved him, and he was going to, you know, put India on the global map. But after 2024, he was a diminished political figure. And that, I think, has played out elsewhere. But I would not even say that too strongly. I don't think the two trends are deeply connected, how he does domestically and what he's doing abroad. In India, foreign policy, when it becomes a domestic political issue, it's more Pakistan. It's not its relationship with the broader world, whether Russia is going to buy, you know, we're going to buy oil from Russia or not, whether Mr. Trump is doing this or that. I don't think they play into India's public opinion enough to make a difference in India's electoral behavior and political behavior. So in answer to that interesting question, I would say domestic and international positions of India are not always deeply connected. And I would not agree with the suggestion that Mr. Modi has consolidated power domestically, but has marginalized India abroad.
Please.
V.S. Sridhara he is asking, in this age of growing inequality, would authoritarianism go hand in hand with some measure of welfarism just to push the crisis further?
It's an interesting suggestion. I don't think so, because the type of authoritarianism we have is not welfare oriented. You know, one can imagine certain types of authoritarianism which do take a national perspective and say, we need the trains to run in time, growth has to be sort of rapid and for the whole country, and while things are being held tight, we will help the poor. That would be a national welfare authoritarian state. Very seldom have we seen such experiments. Even South Korea, which grew very rapidly under Park Chung-hee, hardly spent much on welfare. Welfare spending in Korea emerged only after democratization. So even when authoritarian leaders were supporting the nation and not class, as in Korea under Park Chung-hee, they did not create a welfare state till there was popular pressure from below. So I would be skeptical of right-wing authoritarian leaders who are in bed with big capital also being enlightened enough to create a welfare state.
There is a question from Venkatesh Prasad. World Value Survey says India is moving towards survival value rooted towards irrational values. How then, under present situation, can we imagine a modernity to take shape in India?
The World Value Survey says what?
India is moving towards survival value rooted towards irrational values.
Rooted towards irrational values? I'm not sure I understand those terms.
Yes.
Survival.
Venkatesh, can you please unmute yourself and can you ask that question?
Hi.
No, I heard the question. I heard the question. I'm questioning World Value Survey's language of irrational
Traditional values.
survival.
Traditional values.
You know, I have no idea what they're talking about when they say it's survival values, irrational.
Okay.
I'm not criticizing the questioner. I'm criticizing World Value Survey. Sorry, I don't have an answer to that question. That's all.
And let me take another question from Alok Tandonji. What is basis of your optimism when you yourself admit that there is very little resistance to RSS and Modi?
Yeah, that question I understand and appreciate totally. Yeah. You know, it's the old adage, pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. And it's the duty of a speaker to not end on a pessimistic note. You know, I have my very pessimistic moments. And I debate whether I want to live in this country. If not, which country will have me, you know. So it's not as if I'm Pollyannish by nature. On the other hand, thinking specifically about India, I cannot help but feel that India is much bigger than Modi. And in the end, India will prevail over Modi. It may be a torturous journey. It may take twists and turns, unfortunate ones. But in the end, the common people will prevail. I guess that's where my optimism comes from, because these guys are a footnote on a longish journey. And we may be all gone. You know, the crowd here looks like about my age, and we may all be gone. But I don't think these guys are going to last. I keep thinking Mr. Modi is about my age, and I feel my infirmities. I'm sure he does too. And things pass. If nothing else, time will make them pass. And so there is cause for optimism, because in the end, I think common people and their needs will prevail. That logic will rise back. You cannot fool all the people.
Ragora has shared his question on the chat box itself.
Yes. Yes, I requested him because he is facing some problem with the connection. This is Raghav from Copenhagen Business School, Denmark. Thank you for your nice talk. We can see a trend of rise of right wing all over the world. Do you think we will end up in the same situation of the Second World War because of unstable geopolitical situation?
That's a serious question. I'm thinking I hope not. I think the neoliberal period following Reagan and Thatcher has given us economic inequalities across many different countries of the world. That in turn has undermined prospect of moderate democracy and welfare states. It has encouraged authoritarianism, especially in countries where the institutions were not strong. Whether that spells global conflict, once again, I'm not sure that it's the domestic logic which will lead to international conflict. The international logic has its own life. It's rising China, declining United States. So the question of whether we will end up in the World War II type of situation, it could be, but it may not necessarily be fed by rising income inequalities. Because China's economic inequalities are modest now. They were rising. They have brought them down somewhat. They're still pretty sharp for a communist country, so to speak. But I don't think their foreign policy is being pushed by that. US foreign policy, you could make an argument that a lot of this tamasha Trump is doing is aimed at diverting attention the same way Mr. Modi ji diverts attention from growing economic inequalities to foreign adventurism. In the Trump era could be a function of internal politics and economics. But whether global conflict will be unleashed will have a whole separate series of dynamics which may not be related to internal economic growing inequalities. So that would be my answer.
Our old friend Subrata Sarangi has raised a hand. I will just request him to unmute. Subrata, please.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. Actually, I agree entirely with Professor Kohli about about the fact that Modi is the outcome, is the result of Congress's economic policies. And also, I will add to that the misgovernance of UPA 2, partly factual, partly hyped up. But to what extent the crisis, a present crisis, and the rise of, resurgence of Congress and Rahul Gandhi is really going to lead to a comeback of a comeback of liberal polity is a question from this point of view, that the right wing, the values that is there in general in the society is so much in upswing, so much in upsurge, that a few wins here and there by the Congress or the left of center parties may be there, but in the long run, I don't see a very bright outlook. I was also thinking about the other reason of the rise of right wing from Advani's Rath Yatra and later Modi and all. I think apart from all the liberalization and misgovernance, the way it was imparted to even our generation, it was largely, mugging up science. It was science being taught as a packet of tricks, to solve problems, rather than really teaching science in a scientific manner. Not only science, but also other subjects like history or civics, or even constitutional values. Those were not really taught to us. They were taught to us mechanically. And even the new economic policy that Rajiv Gandhi brought in, it was computers and technology, this and that, but real, educating the minds of the young people to lead a society, to lead a country towards modernity was not there. And now new NEP 2020 is going down even further, taking it down even further. So in this situation, I don't know whether you agree to this kind of formulation, or if you agree, then what is the outlook? I mean, are we just going down and down the hill? I don't know where it is all going to go. It is leading us, and where the liberal policy or liberal, the democratic values or democratic polity that we are looking forward to, whether it is anywhere in the horizon. Are there some green shoots?
In my despondent moments, I see what you're saying. It's not as if what you're suggesting, sir, is it's reasonable. But let me disagree with you, at least on the grounds of pessimism about where we are headed. And it's not just my opinion. I'm going to go back to my analysis, not back to my slides, but I will remind you of my own sort of thinking on this. Now, BJP on its own, without Mr. Modi, remember, was a significant force, but not a formidable force. They had about 22-23% of the popular vote. It took Mr. Modi to give them another 10 to 12%. So think of what happens after Modi. Once Mr. Modi goes, like all leaders must, we're likely to get a pretty competitive political situation. So even if people who deeply believe in liberalism are not at the forefront, at minimum, we will have political competition. And political competition has a way of strengthening liberalism. Not liberalism in a deep sense, but it will
Okay.
open up opportunities for a variety of political forces. In there lies hope for left-of-center social democratic types of parties. They have to prepare the ground and be ready,
Yeah.
because over the next decade, opportunities will open, and people who will benefit are people who have laid the groundwork already. This is what the BJP understood, and this version of Congress did not.
Did not. Okay.
The Congress is still not building up a framework to take benefit of when politics opens up. They continue to think dynastic politics will get them through. They don't have cadres, they don't have parties, they don't have ideology. Does anybody know what Congress Party really stands for? During the last election, Mr. Gandhi almost sounded like a social democrat. Then in an interview at Brown University in the US, he was asked, does he really believe in free markets? And he said yes. So he did not want to give up his pro-market credentials in favor of a social democrat. And in that sense, Congress is still trying to be a little bit of everything, and more important, doesn't have a game plan ready for when politics becomes competitive. India desperately needs a real left-of-center party. And the groundwork for that needs to be laid by people in India. You know, we so quickly get splintered around one state level party, one state party, one state party. We don't have a national left alternative left in India. Yeah. CPM is pretty well, you know, gone.
Yeah.
And
what is that gone?
Maybe I'm wrong about that, but on the whole, so my optimism is not, I don't want to be Pollyannish, as I said before, but if I read the situation correctly in terms of post-Modi, I don't think any party will easily get a majority, and a competitive situation will emerge, which will open up opportunities for progressive forces if they are ready.
If they're ready. Okay. Let me say amen. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Usman has raised a question in the chat box, so I will request him to unmute himself and share his question. Usman, please.
Hi, hello. Thank you, Professor Kohli, for a very clear, very systematic talk. So my question was, you had mentioned, as we all know, I mean, these are facts that poverty reduced in the post-liberalization era and inequality rose, right? And so we tend to give a lot of importance to inequality in terms of explaining the political kind of dynamics and the Modi years as well. But we continue to remain a deeply poor nation as well. Like the median income in India, as per the PLFS, the government surveys, is about 9,000 to 10,000 rupees, right? So we can surmise that about a third of Indians continue to live near destitution levels. So we continue to be a deeply poor country as well. And when thinking about, so my question in an academic kind of sense was, how do we understand poverty and inequality as sort of politically charged phenomena? Like what, you know, and because different kinds of actions follow, right? I mean, poverty, often one thinks of, if political parties or a campaign is to address it, it tends to ask for needs-based solutions or welfare, whereas inequality often is thought of as, you know, leading to more cataclysmic kind of change, being a driver for populism in that sense. That's not the only way to think about it. I don't know what always political scientists think about it. So that was the question. How do we think about these two phenomena differently in the context of a country which is deeply poor and has a trend of increasing inequality?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's clearly a fellow academic. I think poverty begets lack of political efficacy, whereas inequality promotes envy and jealousy. If you agree with that proposition, one can use that to extrapolate what their different political consequences might be. The poor may tend to vote for whoever helps them. That's a dependent behavior. It's a behavior which spells that political efficacy is missing. Whoever is there, my bap, helping, is likely to benefit. And therefore, welfarism, patronage, those types of forces get supported. Inequality has a different sensibility to those who are being left out. So our family servants in Lucknow during summer months, so I was talking to one of them, this is just as an anecdote to make a broader general academic point. So I said to her, "Itni garmi hai, ghar mein tumne pankha lagaya hua hai?" तो कहती है, आप लोग बड़े लोग इतने एयर कंडीशनर्स चलाते हैं कि बिजली नहीं आती. And in that simple question was clear, was class envy, class anger. And this is, even though they're poor, what they're noticing is that the middle class, especially on the upper side, is continuing to leave them way behind, and that is promoting a certain type of envy and anger. If class parties are not available, if there is a failure of class mobilization, this type of envy, anger that inequality promotes becomes readily available for right-wing populism. That's where anger becomes politicized. I don't think the poor, that poverty alone could have promoted a BJP. If there would be, what we would be saying that the poor don't like Muslims in India. Think about that for a minute. So I don't think that poverty alone can help explain emergence of right-wing authoritarianism in a place like India. The question you asked was a very complicated question, and it's asking a lot more evidence would be needed to support the suggestion I have made. You could easily argue with me, well, real revolutions have taken place when the poor took up arms. How can you say poverty sort of promotes lack of efficacy? We could get into a discussion like that. But in the contemporary Indian situation, I think the poor and the destitute respond well to welfarism, and growing inequality promotes anger, marginalization, and they become available for right-wing populists.
Dr. Burusu Srinivasan has raised a question in the chat box. I will request him to unmute himself and share his question. Dr. Burusu, please.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Thank you, Professor Kohli, for a wonderful talk and very educative. And I would like to ask you kind of, regarding the major jump in the inequality seems to be between 1991 and 2013. And of course, there is a jump between 2013 to 2024 as well. But it seems it is a consequence of liberalization. Like, for example, what really took place after 1992 in India. My question is like, how does this turned into like, I mean, of course, you are explaining the kind of envy and jealousy factors, and then I think BJP harnessed that. But I would like to know that is it only the failure of Congress in terms of not being able to, because I think Congress is more benevolent in terms of welfareism, and then also in terms of many other things than compared to BJP. But at the same time, it is painted as a very failed kind of governments, at least the second term, the UP government. So how does one has to look at the rise of this? I mean, one single person, Modi factor, contributing 10 to 12%, and then would you think that this at least 25% or 22% of BJP strength without Modi would remain constant in the future elections as well?
Sir, could you repeat the question again? I'm not sure I got the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just would like to know whether the increase in the inequality, say for example, the raise in the top 1%, is much more from 1991 to 2013 than what is between 2013 to 2024. So, and then would that really? I mean, that is of course. I mean, I think is a product of liberalization itself. I'm not arguing on that. But then, if you see that the between 1991 and 2013, mostly it is UPA governments. It's only a briefly interventional period for the BJP. So it's more or less the same kind of philosophies as far as economics and then GDP and the growth story is concerned. But the rise of Modi factor as a kind of, why does, I mean, you attributed that to the collapse of Congress or the failures of Congress or the UPA government. So I just would like to know that Congress or the UPA being more benevolent in terms of more welfareism, the Manrega and other schemes, why do you think that people have not considered that as a factor and saw it as a failure?
Yeah, I get it, sir. Couple of comments. I think the pattern of growing inequality is changing. The biggest shift between 1991 and 2013 was the gain of the top 10% at the expense of Indian middle classes. Since then, the biggest shift under Modi has been the increase in the top 1% and top 0.1% share. So this phenomena of world-class billionaires is more under Modi, though it had begun during the Congress period. It has now accelerated. So just keep that fact in mind in terms of what's happening to inequality. I know your question is more complicated. It's about politics of all of this. And so let me get back to that. I don't think Congress was more benevolent. I think the NREGA program certainly was a good program. I supported it. I researched it. I walked around fields of Eastern UP to see how it was working and not working. And on the whole, it was a very good thing they were doing. And it's interesting that for a decade, Mr. Modi did not kill it. worried about its political repercussions of killing it. Even NREGA program was opposed within the Congress government in high up places. I remember being at a conference in Delhi, and the Planning Commission had no use for NREGA program. They continued to criticize it for making assets that were not durable, that there was a lot of corruption, that it was raising wages and therefore hurting landlords. And so it really was a program pushed by Sonia Gandhi as a variety of civil activist groups, along with Jean Drèze and others, who sort of pressured the government to pursue it. And it was a good thing to do, but it should not be understood as an overall program which was backed by the liberalizers within the Congress government. There was opposition to it then. That opposition continued by technocrats, and now they have killed it. Have I answered your question, sir?
Yes, sir, surely. Yeah, I got your point. I mean, I got your point. Surely, yes. And I just want to have one more question, if it is permitted. Then but there is a decrease in the manufacturing contribution to the GDP from, say, 2015 to 2024. About 2% has been decreased, despite the support that is garnered by Modi from all the corporate sectors. Do you think that there is a limitation of Indian manufacturing, that it could not grow despite such a favorable government being there, deployed by them, deployed by the corporate sectors? So what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's been documented very nicely by my colleague Nagaraj in Bombay, who's now at the IIT. His article in World Development has very nicely documented that. I urge you to take a look. As to why this is happening, that's a complicated question, as I said even during my talk. The most obvious answer is Chinese manufactured imports into India. They're producing them cheaper, we let them in, and it is beginning to hurt Indian manufacturing. But it raises more complex questions of why government support for corporate sector cannot neutralize some of that advantage that the Chinese have of head start. Labor is now cheaper in India. If there was a systematic policy, I'm not persuaded that it cannot be overcome. I think it's a failure of policy, though I know colleagues whom I respect think the answer is technological. So Danny Roderick in his new book is saying manufacturing is simply not going to be the future of growth in poor countries, that they're going to have to go the service sector route. I'm not persuaded by that. I don't think we can create jobs in India without manufacturing jobs. I think if we go the service sector route, we will remain mostly an informal economy, and maybe we get lucky with service sector niches in global economy and we can continue to grow. But I think the emphasis on manufacturing needs to be revived. Right now, we don't have a coherent policy. Indian capital is taking the easy way out to make its profits. The government supports them because they're also taking the easy way out, and nobody is willing to take the hard decision of how do you get on a sort of more difficult task of building up manufacturing, which will essentially mean government pressing capital to say, for a while, you have to accept lower rates of profitability. You capture global niches while you don't have as much profit and we will see what happens 20 years down the line, But that type of political arrangement is simply missing in India. That's why I said class in India is winning out over nation. And so we don't have coherent development strategy which will help the whole country. Instead, we have incoherent crony capitalism.
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, thank you. I got it. Yes.
Now I would like to bring to your notice another question. Rather, it is a comparative question. His name is not given. So,
I'm sorry?
His name is not given, so I can't say who is he or she. Sir, I'm reading the question. Sir, I want to bring Pranab Bardhan thesis here. Inequality versus insecurity as drivers of populism. Conventionally, inequality is a left-wing issue and important for workers. But the current trend shows workers are moving towards right-wing populist demagogues. Bardhan answers, because left never addresses the issue of cultural insecurity. He also says workers are more angrier to cultural elites than financial elites, and the left never pay attention to the issues of cultural elites. What's your thoughts on this analysis of Pranab Bardhan?
Pranab Bardhan was my thesis advisor at Berkeley. So whatever I say, I have to say with respect. I read that book closely, and I was wondering what Pranab meant by cultural and social insecurity. And if you read that carefully, what Pranab says, what are the roots of cultural and social insecurity? And here I'm quoting because I had quoted him in my own book recently, so I remember. He says the roots are mostly economic. I'm pausing because I want you to register that. That, yes, he's talking about cultural insecurity, he's talking about social insecurity, but it's rooted mostly in economic factors. Of course, if you have economic insecurity, variety of cultural manifestations will emerge. If you have without a job, you live like you're feeling you're not worthwhile as a human being. You can't support your family. You're feeling ashamed of your own competence. And somebody out there is telling you, you don't need to feel ashamed. All your problems are because of this and that trend in the society. You will become attracted to that. So it is not hard to imagine economic insecurity leading to social insecurity being exploited by political entrepreneurs on the right. Pranab is quite right in suggesting that the left did not address these issues well. But I will go back to my earlier suggestion in response to Mr. Ravi Sinha's point that bigotry comes much more easily to right-wing parties than it does to left-wing parties. So it would take me quite far from this talk to talk about the role of identity politics even within left. But it is the case that class politics also succeeds most when it's combined with some type of identity politics. British miners become a powerful political force when they consider each other mates as a community. Chinese communists succeeded when they were able to mobilize nationalism against the Japanese. So class and variety of identity issues have often combined, and that's when they become powerful force. In the current milieu, the right wing has an advantage and the left has squandered the opportunity to mobilize growing inequalities. That part I agree with Pranav.
Subhash.
Yeah,
Subhash.
Grisha Shankar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Grisha Shankar has raised his hand. Please unmute yourself and share your question or comment. Grisha Shankar, please.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible. Audible.
Yeah. So, sir, very nice presentation. Thank you very much. I have a question that was probably not generally addressed. The thing is, in general, the quality of life has been going down steadily in India, be it in terms of raising corruption, the increased AQI levels, reducing urban spaces, lack of housing, or poor quality of any kind of service you pick. And this is across the political spectrum. And we don't see much of a public debate about it, be it in the general public. Everybody agrees to that, but it's not a movement as such, not even in the political circles. What could be the reason? Do you see anything such, any improvement happening in this in the near future? Without that, I don't think even if we become a 10 trillion economy, it's going to be useless.
I agree with the observation of general decline in quality of living. If you look at the inequality data which I showed you, what I found really stunning is that the gain of upper classes are at the expense not of lower classes, but middle classes. Because the lower classes, you can't take away any more from them without killing them. So it's sort of, they have hit a rock bottom. So more inequality, if it's going to come, it's not going to come at the expense of the poorest. It is coming at the expense of the middle class in India. And therefore, what you suggest, that there is an overall decline of quality, what you're experiencing, data supports. Why there is not enough political reaction to that? You know, it's where I live in the US, you could say similar things about the decline of the middle class. And then you ask, how come people still support Trump? And it's something similar, I think, on that front is going on in India too. It is not easy to find political alternatives that necessarily address how your situation will become better. If you had your choice of a good politician who will make your life better, you would probably vote for them. But the issue gets so confused in elections, purposely so, as to who has the better alternative promise. Is better economic growth likely to improve your situation? Is better distribution likely to improve your situation? Is improvement in the quality of government likely to improve your situation? Is better center-state relations likely to improve your situation? A better mayor in your city likely to improve your situation? And since politicians can promise all of those, a coherent collective response to declining life opportunities is not easy. However, if there is a progressive party that people can identify with and that starts building up a track record of delivering public services, modest redistribution without discouraging growth, then that becomes a realistic alternative. So I will come back to what I have suggested a few times. India desperately needs a social democratic party.
Last question from chat box. Bhargav, please.
I have a last question from the chat box, sir. It is from Mr. Radhakrishnan. What is so magical about states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala to stand as solid rocks against the so-called wave of Modi?
God bless them, those types of states, Tamil Nadu I have studied, and my co-author has written very well on it. I wish Kanta was here. She is from Tamil Nadu and has explained that in our book, why it has both resisted Modi and why it has been able to combine a degree of growth and good distribution in spite of enormous corruption in the leadership. But the issue of why BJP has less of an appeal in southern part of India BJP is really a party of Hindi heartland. It's a party that has always appealed first and foremost in Gujarat, Maharashtra, then UP, and on to other states of that part. My own suggestion is, in my writings, has been that where there was Mughal Empire, where there was real politicization of Hinduism against Islam, those historical memories built into archives can be mobilized now and act in favor of the BJP. So if you can still talk about Shivaji, mobilizing against Islam, it appeals to certain types of BJP supporters. In South India, that history is simply missing. They have their own demons to fight, and their demon is not Islam in the same way that it is. So I think they have been spared that history, and the answer of why BJP is less appealing to South India has long historical roots, which go back to where Islam played a domineering role in earlier phases and is now being challenged, and where Hindus have become hostile to it.
Thank you once again, Professor Kohli, for this excellent presentation, very thought-provoking, and also sharing why we need to be helpful in these dark times. So that is very important aspect of your presentation. So, and thanks all of you for joining this debate. Thank you once again. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, all of you.
Good night. Good night. Yeah.
Okay, bye. Thank you.